In today's video, we're going to be looking at slow motion with the Sony a6700, and there are actually two ways to achieve slow motion, and you're going to find out more in this video and the differences between those. I'll also include some details about file sizes, the specific card types you need if you want to film at the highest quality possible at 4K 120 10-bit 422, and some post-processing techniques to help you decide which is the better option for you to film those cinematic motion shots in your videos. Hi, I'm Dimitrios, and if you're passionate about drones, photography, and everything in between, then you're in the right place. I create a series of videos breaking down larger topics into smaller ones, making you feel less overwhelmed, as well as gear reviews, so subscribe to stay up to date. Now let's take a look at everything you need to know with slow motion with the Sony a6700. Now, as mentioned earlier, there are two ways to film slow motion with the Sony a6700, and this actually applies to anything with the newer menu with the Sony cameras. So if you have this newer menu system, then it applies to those cameras as well. Now, the first way is to film in regular video mode, and all you need to do here is just film at a higher frame rate. So instead of filming at 24 or 30 frames per second, you can just shoot at 60 or even 120 frames per second. You just then have to adjust the shutter speed, and you slow this down in post to achieve slower motion footage or cinematic footage in your videos. And the other option to film slow cinematic footage is to use S&Q mode. And the good thing is with these newer Sony cameras is that they can actually render the slow motion footage within camera, so you don't have to do any post-processing whatsoever. Now, some of the options you get here is you can film at 4K 60, and you can slow this by 50%, which is 2 times slow motion. 4K 120 can be up to 5 times slow motion, and that's if you're on a 24 frames per second timeline. Or if you're using a 30 FPS, that will be 4 times slow motion. Or if you want even more cinematic footage, you can get up to 10 times slow motion if you film at 1080p on a 24 frames per second timeline. Just note the difference between video and S&Q mode is that in video you can actually record audio. With S&Q mode, no audio is recorded. So this is normal video mode. I'm shooting now at 4K 60. I can see that on the screen. And now I'm going to slow it down by 50%. This is what happens to the audio when you slow down footage in normal mode. And then we go back up to normal speed again. If you do want to record audio and slow your footage down, you have to use video mode and use 4K 60 that way. Now, how to set up slow motion. With video, it's pretty straightforward. As mentioned earlier, you just film at a higher frame rate, so 60 frames per second if you're on a 24 or 30 frames per second timeline. And then you just slow this down in post by slowing down the footage. With an S&Q mode, you press the menu button and then you go down to S&Q settings, and here you'll be able to set the frame rates for your camera. So are you on a 24 or 30 frames per second timeline? And then you choose your frame rate, and it will even tell you within your menu system how slow or fast this slow motion would be. And then if you want to change the recording setting, you would then pick the bit rate as well. So are you filming at 8-bit, or do you want to get the maximum option possible using 10-bit 422? And this will allow for better color grading, and you have more dynamic range in your footage. Now, to achieve the best camera settings, you just have to use the same principles as you would do normally with video. So you want to follow the 180-degree shutter rule. So 120 frames per second, essentially you want to have your shutter speed at 1/250, and this will be close enough to the 180-degree rule. And this will give you the lovely motion blur in your footage. If you're filming at 60 frames per second, you want to go over 1/20, 1/120. Again, you might need a variable ND filter if it's a really bright sunny day to help you achieve the correct exposure. And then you would even want to adjust your ISO settings. Again, this will depend on the lighting scenario that you're shooting in, whether it's really bright sunny day or is it low light, and you'll need to adjust accordingly. You would also want to select whether you want to use manual focus or autofocus, or if you want to use some of the Sony a6700 AI features, whether you want to track people, cars, planes, or whatever object you're trying to capture. Now, the great thing is with both video and S&Q mode, you have the option to either shoot in any picture profile you want. So normal, S-Cinetone, or even S-Log3. When shooting in S-Log3, this will give you more dynamic range with your footage and even give you more possibilities with color grading later in post. Now, the one thing to note when I was doing my testing for this with the Sony a6700 is that the file sizes are much larger when you're filming at higher frame rates because there's more frames in that video. So if you take a look at the file size comparison here, this was just based on a 1-minute clip. And we have here for both video mode for 4K 30 and 4K 60, there is a 41% increase. And when you're filming in S&Q mode, you can see the difference here again between HD, 4K 60 and 4K 120. There's an increase at 36 and 97% here. So the more frames you have, the bigger the file sizes are. Now, the other thing here is that you want a very fast memory card when filming in these higher quality frame rates. So if you want to make the max quality possible, so 4K, 120, 10-bit 422, you're going to need a V90 card here. And these are pretty inexpensive. I will link this in the description box down below. I think this was just over 100 US, give or take, maybe a little bit more, 120 maybe. If you had a V60 card, this will be fine. You just can't film at 4K 120 10-bit. You could probably just film 4K 120 8-bit and that will be sufficient, or just use a lower resolution. Again, if you want the smoothest cinematic footage possible, you can just lower this down to 1080p and you can get up to 10 times the slow motion footage. Also, within my findings when testing slow motion footage with the Sony a6700, there is a huge crop in at 4K 120. So just take this into account. You might need a wider lens in order to accommodate the huge punch in with the slow motion footage there. There is also no active stabilization in 4K 120. Now, to make the most of this, ideally you want to film fast-paced action shots, so either running on the beach, filming cycling or motorsports events where you can slow down that footage and see the action. That's where it's most beneficial. You want to be as smooth as possible. And I think there is a mix between either turning off stabilization completely and just doing this in post. This might be more beneficial and you get less of a weird warping effect if trying to stabilize footage that's already been stabilized in camera. And this can happen. If you want to learn more about the video testing that I've done with the 6700, check the video up here somewhere and it will cover more on that stabilization. You either want to be on a tripod or just be as smooth as possible when holding the camera, and you don't want to have much jerky movements. Normally when you're filming slow cinematic footage, it comes out a little bit better anyway, stabilized, rather than regular video. Now, how do we slow down footage at higher frame rates that hasn't been processed in camera? Now, all you need to do is just drag and drop this into your timeline. In this example here, we're using DaVinci Resolve, and we just have to go to the speed section of the footage and then just slow this down by 50%. Or if you've recorded at 4K 60 as an example, if at 4K 120, you can slow this down to 25% to get that smooth cinematic footage. And this is both for video and S&Q mode if you didn't render it in camera. If you want to save yourself some time in post-processing and not having to fiddle around with settings, if you have this rendered in camera, you can literally just drag and drop into the timeline and you don't have to do any more post-processing to that footage. Just note, when it comes to speed ramping, you might want to film in video mode and then you're able to speed ramp that footage without having to have a break in the clips. I hope that covers everything that you need to know about the Sony a6700 in slow motion and using 4K 120. Have you tried using this feature? Let me know in the comment section down below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more content on drones, photography, and everything in between. And YouTube recommends you watch this video next.